Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war, but stretching out to other things because I'm bound to talk about all the crazy stuff that's going on in the world. Geopolitics update. I am glad I'm speaking to you because otherwise my head would be just going around in circles and I'll be ranting to myself. It's exhausting, isn't it? Politics at the moment is exhausting. Honestly, just bring back just sensible, calm politicians that just boringly get on with governing in a very uninteresting sort of way. Just quietly competent. You know, someone like, for example, Mark Carney, like the PM of Canada. Just someone like him, just be in charge of everything. Just like, yeah, I was a banker. I know what I'm doing. I've got a pretty good heart, morally decent person. I'm quite good with money, and I know a lot of stuff. And I'm just gonna rule for a bit, and you'll be all right. It's not gonna be. I'm gonna light your lives on fire here. You're not gonna be like, ooh, running down the street naked, shout about me. But you can get on and do all your other stuff like living. And I'll just be taking care of stuff back here, governing and stuff. That's what I'd like. Just yeah, it's not quite what we've got at the moment, is it? Mix of dictators, dictator wannabes, populists, batshit crazy people, and trying to keep on top of everything. Because it turns out that I've accidentally become like a one-man news channel. Because I like it and it's fascinating, and I can't know about things in isolation. So I've got to know about this and how that affects that, and then you've got to know about this and how that affects that, and then in the end you're like, oh, I understand why news channels report on everything in the world, because everything in the world is pretty important, and it all kind of connects because we live in an interconnected world. But my goodness, it's exhausting. Anyway, we'll start with the normal. Yes, and we're going to be talking a little bit about this. Paul Gilbert says, I avoided the Trump-Starmer presser. I thought the JP would analyze it for us all. Well, actually, so I haven't watched it, and I've just gleaned a couple of snippets. We're just going to go into a kind of overview that's been provided by others. So I do apologize for not having watched this live, just because I've been trying to keep an eye on freaking everything, Paul. But I think we can get a fair sense of what went on. So let's start there. That's probably a sensible place to start, Paul. So we will. Okay, Anton Gerashenko picks out, there are a couple of key points to this. Actually, no. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to the snap verdict here, which I think gives you a good sense of what this presser was about. So we know that Trump has been in the UK for the last day or so, where he has had a state dinner, and this was all to do with trying to get him on side with regard to Ukraine. So the whole thing was about Ukraine. We must remember that. Starmer went over to the White House to say, look, here's a letter from the king. You're welcome to a state dinner, because that's the sort of thing that Trump really likes. He feels the center of everything. It's all the pomp and circumstance of, the British monarchy and yada, yada, yada. So he feels all sort of super important. And that's your way of saying, right, okay, I've given that to you. It's a pretty easy thing to do. I don't have to sign over all sorts of diplomatic goodies for you, or economic, you don't have to leverage economic value out of us. We can just give you this state dinner and you'll be like, way. And then that becomes a vehicle to try and influence you over Ukraine, not only at the White House originally when he was given that, but then over the last 24 hours plus, where it's clear that King Charles was big on Ukraine, Queen Camilla, sounds weird saying that, and Melania Trump were wearing blue and yellow. It's very clearly synchronized. It was about Ukraine, and I think he's probably had like every interaction with British dignitaries will have included some element of Ukraine. There's a lot to do with the economics and actually, but also Ukraine. Those are two things. And so we need to understand that while we might expect loads of stuff out of this this visit. A lot of the benefit from the visit would probably be invisible to us, which would be in terms of trying to shift Trump's positioning on Ukraine. And that might not be immediately visible. That said, the stat verdict is probably the TLDR of this is like, meh. So there's a lot of talk these days about the need for people in politics to be able to disagree agreeably, to use a phrase popularized by Alistair Campbell, describing the approach he adopts with Rory Stewart in their Restless Politics podcast. Since Campbell and Stewart are centrists, they don't have a lot to disagree on anyway, but it's a noble idea and a good phrase. And now it turns out that Donald Trump seems to have adopted it too. When Theresa May was Prime Minister, she had an excruciating press conference with Trump at Chequers when he half-heartedly played down an interview he had given to The Sun, implying she implying that he did not rate her much. The lack of respect was obvious. There was none of that today. So you could say the success of this is that kind of nothing happened and he sort of like Starmer. You could read that as a success in a way. You could also read it as not achieving much at all. So the president did not try to undermine Keir Starmer in any way. And although he acknowledged that they have a different view on Israel and Gaza, it was cordial and rational. Other potential disagreements did not arise or were glossed over. Trump unusually was diplomatic. So this happened over Gaza when it's clear that the UK are going to recognize Palestine as a state. And Trump was like, I disagree with that. You know, there was a public disagreement, but it was done really, you know, amicably in a sense. So it was like not an issue. This meant that the news quotient was on the low side. On Russia, Trump dropped hints about a new initiative against Russia, but it's hard to tell how serious he was, or it was. His analysis of the conflict backed up what his friend Christopher Ruddy was telling the Today program this morning. There are no big announcements here. The declaration that Trump wants to buy or lease Bagram Air Base from the Taliban was certainly novel. But is that much more than fantasy? Perhaps he's just floating the potential territorial acquisition because he has finally accepted that his plans to annex Canada and Greenland aren't going anywhere. Trump may have been at his most diplomatic, but that did not mean he had given up on shameless half-truths. His Peter Who response to the question about Peter Mandelson, the UK ambassador to the US, who has been sacked because of his links to Jeffrey Epstein, will have caused much amusement at Westminster, and in the US, his suggestion that Jimmy Kimmel was fired for his ratings will be dismissed as a lie. Starmer's answers on most topics were predictable, but his declaration that the Church of England has been my church all my life was not something I think he has said publicly before. He's an atheist, and his election last year promoted a debate in religious circles about whether having an atheist prime minister was a problem. Of course, David Cameron was an atheist. Nick Clegg, his deputy, was an atheist. Theresa May wasn't. By the way, it was interesting, actually, because Nick Clegg was leader of the Lib Dems, David Cameron, leader of the Conservatives, and Ed Miliband, leader of Labour, and all three were atheists, although Cameron tried to write back a bit, said his faith was like the radio signal in the Chilterns, it comes and goes. But essentially, all three are atheists, and we don't have a particularly big culture in the UK in terms of having to admit you've got religion, that you are religious. It's not a thing. In fact, the more religious you are in the UK, the less popular you're likely to be with the average voter. We are, although we're not a secular country, we are culturally secular, and no one really likes overt religiosity. There was this old saying that you never talk about politics and religion at the dinner table, and that's very different from the US, where you have to virtue signal your religion, so that now it turns out that, I forget what the percentage is, but it's something like, you know, almost 100% of American senators and representatives have traditionally said that they are religious. Right now, you've got a couple who say that they are free thinkers, but they don't use the term atheist. But they are completely underrepresented in Congress because they know that if they openly said they didn't believe in God, that they will likely not get elected. And so there's this unwritten rule in American politics that you have to virtue signal your religion. In the UK, it's almost the opposite. You kind of tone down your religious beliefs. I remember when what's Fallon, the Lib Dem, I keep thinking Jimmy Fallon, was it Michael Fallon, the Lib Dem leader, who was pretty evangelical, and that he struggled. That after Nick Clegg was the leader, he struggled to get purchased with the electorate because of that. I think so. Anyway, it's just a really interesting difference between the US and the UK here. So that Keir Starmer mentioned that the Church of England has been my church all my life is kind of weird because he's an atheist. So half a day with a MAGA president, and is Starmer finding his faith? Probably not, but it's interesting anyway. I will post his the full words shortly. Brackets, if non-British readers find this confusing, it is worth pointing out that atheism and a loose allegiance to the Church of England are not at all incompatible. There is a thing, I could tell you this from my philosophy of religion, there's a thing called Christian atheism. Like you might think that's weird, but it's a bit like secular Judaism, where you are culturally Jewish, but you don't believe in God. And so there's a similar sort of thing that you can find with occasionally with Christianity, which is, people identify with the cultures of the church and like all that kind of side of it, but actually don't really believe in God. Anyway, that's just a bit of an aside there. So here are some headlines from what sort of happened over the last few hours, as we can see from the Guardian live blog. So we're going to go just through these headlines to let you know what's happened. There's been a massive tech deal today, so that's the big thing. Supposedly, creating 15,000 jobs, and I'll talk about that in a second because that is super, super important for Starmer and potentially for the UK, but could come with a load of problems. Trump says the US and UK have done more good on the planet than any two nations in history. Trump says Putin has really let me down over Ukraine. Trump says one of his few disagreements with Starmer is over Palestinian state recognition, which the UK backs. Trump says the UK should consider using the military to stop illegal immigration. Isn't that interesting? Send in the National Guard or whatnot, or use them like ICE. Trump urges Keir Starmer to use more oil and gas. And of course, this is because Trump is not only lobbied by the fossil fuel industries, but he's lobbied to the point where he is so anti-renewables it's almost laughable. He's taken away grants for renewables and then adding taxes as well. And this is at a time, I was listening to some stats the other day, really fascinating stats on solar power generation in the world. And a guy was saying that China at the moment produces enough solar to power the UK 25 times at our highest usage rates. So China has just gone off the charts with solar and wind as well. And it's really fascinating. Yes, they are building new coal-fired power station, power plants, you know what I'm saying. But they are also just going to town on renewables, and the US is getting left behind on renewables, and they are price competitive now. And so therefore that's economically a ridiculous decision, irrespective of what your position is on environmentalism. So I do understand why Trump is saying this, because he's being lobbied to say this, and he's got some kind of ideological bent there, but it's ridiculous and it makes no sense. He wants us to start using more oil and gas like this is freaking 1955. Starmer urges Trump to increase the pressure on Putin over Ukraine, so that's good. Trump says Jimmy Kimmel fired for bad ratings and lack of talent, claiming this is not a freedom of speech case. Please, 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 if you haven't done so, go and watch my Jimmy Kimmel video, because I think it's really cogent. I know that it sounds ridiculous, like I'm patting myself on the back. It's a really important video, and it actually touches on a number of different aspects to do with freedom of speech. So please, if you have a spare hour, it's a pretty big analysis, but it's really, really important and joins a lot of the dots together. We will touch on this later in this video. Trump says, claims not to know Peter Mandelson or why he was fired as ambassador to the US. Get out of that one. Trump says he's willing to do more against Russia, but not if Europeans keep buying Russian oil. Of course, we're back to this idea of you need to speak to Hungary and Slovakia. And then finally, Trump says he wants the US to regain Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan, implying Taliban may negotiate its handover. So there you go. That's pretty much that. Right, so a few elements here. Now, in this one, you won't be able to hear this because it's on the wrong browser, but the question from Beth Rigby was, you say Putin has let you down. Was it a mistake to invite him to Alaska? do you regret it? President Trump said no. And she said, and is it time to squeeze him, sir, and scare him and impose sanctions? And Trump sort of said yeah and nods, but it isn't quite as forceful as Anton Gerashenko maybe indicates here. So he kind of like nods to squeezing Putin, but I don't know that there's any clear indication that he's going to go to town on Russia from these interactions. Tim White said the only thing remotely interesting, in my opinion, was Trump saying Russia will have to end the war if the oil price falls. Now, this is something he said before, to be honest. It's nothing new. In fact, he was saying this before the election back in November. And that's really important. But, you know, that's where you could come on board much more with the price oil cap, the US, and you could help with that big time by convincing, you know, if you want that to happen. The problem is that the EU speaks to Slovakia and Hungary about weaning off themselves off oil, then that is a division between them and the EU, and it becomes like their position of not doing that would be in line with their Euroscepticism, right? What Slovakia and Hungary really need is actually Donald Trump to say, you need to stop taking Russian oil. Honestly, it's really, really important that Trump speaks to both Robert Fico and Viktor Orban. And I can't tell you how important that is. That should not come from the EU. You might say, Americans will say, well, it's your problem. You need to sort it out. Yeah, fair enough. I understand the concept. But if the EU speaks to those people from a position of authority, they will automatically push back. Like the EU would simply not get Fico and Orban to kowtow to their demands. That is much more effective coming from Donald Trump, as they are kind of beholden to Trump. We're going to return to that in a second, by the way, as well. After bland statements from Trump and Starmer, the leaders in the US and UK are now being grilled by journalists, says Tim White. And the first question is about Ukraine. Trump again mentioned Albania. So just to let you know, in case you don't know, I almost reported this the other day, but basically Trump keeps calling Armenia Albania. And he even said I stopped a war between Azerbaijan and Albania, and everyone's like looking at that going, hang on, Albania's over here and they're not at war. What's going on there, mate? Because he keeps saying the wrong thing, but you know, it's okay for him to do that. Of course, Joe Biden's not allowed to do that because that shows he's not fit to be president, but Trump, that's fine. So that's the third time he's mixed up Armenia for Albania. All the president said is, we hope to have good news. So, then this is the issue that I have. So in this presser, and this is in line with what we hear now, we're hearing that the ABC Australia was banned from being here. So Trump has dictated that ABC Australia, because that guy asked him a difficult question about his business concerns the other day, and he went to town on that Australian reporter. You remember that? I reported that to you. And we were like wondering whether they'd be allowed in the White House, and thinking surely they can't be that crass, the White House. And no, they can. So ABC Australia have now been banned from the presser here. And I think Trump handpicked journalists to softball him questions. That's what I understand. So next one of Trump's personally picked journalists tries to get in a dig at the lack of free speech in the UK. So it's just like, seriously, on the day that Jimmy Kimmel's been cancelled by the FCC effectively, and by the GOP effectively, you have a journalist having a go at the UK for freedom of speech. Anyway, ridiculous. So next loaded question from the OSO Free Speech Press Pack, ouch, allowed into the UK is to ask PM Starmer if he will take similar action against Antifa after Trump declared them a terrorist organization. There is no Antifa organization over here. We don't have it, and there is no real kind of Antifa. I don't know if it's even right to call them an organization anyway. Antifa, of course, standing for anti-fascist. I just want to show you this because you might find this interesting. So here's a fact, according to Ed Krasenstein. Adolf Hitler had Antifa arrested. He had members of the original Antifascista Aktion, anti-fascist action, arrested as one of the very first actions he made when taking power in 1933. It was the beginning of the Nazi regime. We also hear this. From the Montreal Star on February the 4th, 1939, Herr Goebbels angered by anti-Nazi wit. Comedians have been banned for humorous remarks on leaders. Berlin, February the 4th, UP, when Propaganda Minister Paul Joseph Goebbels yesterday blasted Germany's Cafe Society. He called it society rabble and intellectual snobs for laughing at comedians who make Nazi leaders the butts of their jokes. Goebbels turned his anger upon the society rabble after announcing that 5 German actors have been banned from the stage for publicly ridiculing the Nazi Party and state functionaries. He denied that there was any lack of humor in Nazi Germany, but said that it must be good-natured, decent and clean. There is plenty of humor in Germany, more than enough, he said in a 3 1/2 column editorial in the Nazi Party's newspaper, Völkische Beobachter. But we do not permit ourselves to be ridiculed. The 5 actors were Werner Fink, actor, blah, 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 blah. The 5 was said to have been warned repeatedly to stop making jokes about the Nazis. And now we have Jimmy Kimmel cancelled and Antifa cancelled. And you're like, yeah, is it right to start making or continue making actually analogies and parallels and connections to Nazi Germany? Well, actually, I think we're fully justified because the playbook is being followed pretty well. So anyway, you might disagree with my joining of the dots there, but I think it's a bit of a problem. There's a question about who will own TikTok. More on that a bit later. Then the same US reporter asked why Starmer is waiting until Trump leaves before recognizing Palestine as an independent state. Starmer lambasted Hamas and denied he was waiting till Donald had left, but wasn't very convincing in my opinion. Starmer urged some European nations to look again at importing Russian oil. Trump added his displeasure while also denying Alaska was a mistake. And that's pretty much that. Okay, so you might argue that that is somewhat underwhelming, and it kind of is. So here are some criticisms. Ed Davey, the leader of the Lib Dems, says Starmer has pulled out all the stops to flatter and impress Trump, but still hasn't managed to get him to drop the damaging tariffs, take on Putin, or tell Netanyahu to stop waging genocide. It's time for the UK to stand tough with allies who share our values. And here, Clive Lewis, who is the Labour MP for Norwich, so in Starmer's own party, saying nothing screams Mandelson brokered deal, so he's talking about the tech deal, like auctioning off our values to BlackRock and Palantir for £150 billion and a handshake with Trump. If investment comes at the price of our values, it's not a bargain, it's a bribe. So Starmer banks on £150 billion investment to placate critics of the Trump state visit. So here's my synopsis for what it's worth. The UK is in a super weak position. We are tremendously weak. And I said this before when we were talking about the tariff wars, because we are out of the EU. When the US is looking for doing trade deals, we are going to bite their hand off for less than what the EU are being given by the US in terms of tariffs, because we don't want to be screwed because we don't have the safety net of being in the EU. So when we get hit economically, it will hurt us alone as a standalone nation. So we do not have a security blanket anymore. And what with our very precarious economic position, we are in a desperate position. Like the entire Labour agenda absolutely is contingent upon economic growth. And at the moment, economic growth is not looking good because there are trade wars going on, because of the precariousness of global energy markets, and actually because of the onslaught of AI and tech. Like I went into my local, I live in a place near a place called Fareham, right? And going into the shopping precinct there, and Game, like the big computer store I used to buy stuff for my boys, computer games, that's now closed down. So Demnan's has gone, Game has gone, like half the shops are now empty. Now, I understand why they're empty because I spend most of my money online. So I understand why shops are closing. But we are moving towards a very tech-orientated existence where we don't even need to leave our houses in order to fulfill our social, like this, you guys with us, I talked about this before, this is kind of like part of our social life, right? I talk to you, you talk to me, you talk to each other, and we feel like we're in a community, okay? And so we don't need to go down a pub and have a pint with our mates that we've known for years, because actually we're online talking to each other. And I think all countries in the world are to differing degrees, and more advanced countries are going to be feeling this much more, are going to be in trouble with regard to the economy, considering tech and AI. So, as I told you before, when I was on holiday, I met someone who was a partner in an accountancy firm, and he said, like, all the jobs, all the accountant level jobs down here, where you had to come in and do this grunt work, is now all done by AI. So our company didn't like it, but his company had got rid of all this level of people and replaced them with AI already. And he said, and that might sound kind of good if you're talking about like bottom line profits, but he said the problem is all those people earn loads of experience. They have to do the grunt work to understand how the next level works. And the next level are human beings. And if you are now taking people to go in straight away at this level, because that level below is done by AI, then they don't have the requisite knowledge of all the grunt work that you need to do to be able to make the decisions up here. And then that affects the next level, the next level. And he said that, right now that's good, but I can see there's going to be problems with expertise and knowledge going forward. But then I guess you just keep replacing with AI. But like he was already talking about the impact on his business of AI, having got rid of staff and having other impacts as well. So AI is going, and lots of people are predicting this, there are going to be huge job losses due to AI. So then go back to this situation. If you're the UK and you're out of the EU, you don't have a safety blanket. The US is strong arming all their allies and all their adversaries, and they are just acting like the bully in the playground, wanting to leverage and leverage and leverage. I imagine the tech deal that's just been done with the US has been to the US's benefit and not to our benefit, which is what you'd expect when you have an asymmetry. Anytime you are doing a deal, the person in a power position is going to get the better deal. It's just how it works. Like this was my argument for not leaving the EU. It's like we now have to renegotiate every single one of our trade deals outside of the biggest trade bloc in the world. We are now minnows compared to, so we went and did a trade deal with Australia and New Zealand, and we're supposed to be bigger than them, and it was a shite trade deal, and Australia and New Zealand got a better trade deal out of us than we got out of them. And then at the time, the Conservative, I don't know if they were MPs, but the people on behalf of the government who were negotiating that trade deal actually, like a couple of months later, admitted it was a terrible trade deal. And we did a terrible trade deal with Japan. Right. And we're like, so when you're outside of a big trade bloc, you're fighting. And usually it should be that the more powerful nation or entity gets the better deal because you have more leverage, you have more power. So, if you're Fiji doing a deal with France, right, you can imagine France is probably going to get a slightly better deal unless Fiji has some amazing leverage. So what this all means is we are floating on our own now as a smaller nation, and everyone says, yeah, we can make our own decisions. That's great. Yeah, but we are less powerful. And it means that if the US comes along and demands a tech deal with us, then that our tax and regulation will be hammered. And that the US has probably they might be putting some big investment in the UK, but I think there's probably going to be areas where we've been had. The problem is this is a massive dilemma. So if Starmer stands up to the US and stands up to Trump and says, no, you need to be harder on Ukraine, and no, we're going to put tech regulation on US tech industries, then the US turns around and says, screw you, then we're not investing in the UK. We're going to put tariffs on you and we're not going to help Ukraine out. Keir Starmer has a no-win situation here, and this is what I've said in terms of everything regarding the US recently, is that everyone has to lick the boots of Trump, because if they don't, then Trump doesn't help Ukraine, and Trump then starts a trade war with you and puts the extra tariffs on. And he's the big bully. The US is a big bully. So rather than working as an alliance previously with the US and working closely with them and trying to do deals nicely, Trump is approaching international diplomacy like he did with Mexico and Canada and Greenland, etc., etc. And so Keir Starmer, this is probably, and this is going to sound like I'm being some kind of cheerleader for Starmer, because I'm not, because I would love it that we stood up to the US and said, no, screw you, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. But then we would be losing more jobs, and it would be, I think Starmer's probably done what the only kind of thing he could do, which is try and argue as good a trade deal as possible, tech deal with the US, but we're probably going to get screwed over by BlackRock and Palantir. And the US stays marginally, hopefully a bit more on side for Ukraine, and it's not a disaster. And there's not a big argument between these people. But in the long run, Trump is in a power position, and I think that's probably what's played out here. I hope that makes sense. Like, it's not really what I want to happen, but you know, this is it. This is such a good way of putting it. Be rich and spineless, or poor and proud. Now, when we make those decisions, and I never know whether to call you Michelle or Michael or whatever, but anyway, when we make these decisions as an individual, I can make a decision that hurts my pocket, but I can stand up tall and be proud, right? And that those are things I've done before. I'm an ethical consumer, so I will consume things ethically, even if it costs me a little bit more money, so I can stand up more proudly and say, no, I bought this because actually it's fair trade, or it's this, or it's that, right? But if you're a leader of a country, you are answerable to your electorate, and you might stand up and say, yeah, I've stood up strong and been proud. But if then that country puts tariffs on you, and your electorate then start having inflation, and we have a trade war with the US, then you'll have some people saying, yeah, you did the right thing. But most people don't really care about standing up and being proud as a nation. We're price-driven people. They'll be like, why have we got extra inflation? Screw you, Keir Starmer, blah, blah, blah. So the dilemma is, when you're running a country, the right thing to do from a purely moralistic point of view, and the right thing to do for your electorate in terms of how does this affect the economy? How does this affect this? How does this affect that? And these are classic dilemmas where what's the least worst? Well, it depends what your metric of success is. So, yes, the electorate will understand. See, Canada, but that's interesting, Michelle, because you speak to someone like Michael Vuchar, who's in the live chat at the moment as a Canadian, and he says actually that Mark Carney's been really weak and is completely capitulated to Trump. So we might understand from Europe that Carney's actually been fairly strong, but there are those in Canada, who are actually saying that Mark Carney's done exactly what Keir Starmer's done, which is capitulate on all the big things. So the tech regulation and tax was chopped off the agreement. They got rid of that because the US demanded it, so on and so forth. So I think it'd be interesting to see what other Canadians say about that. So yeah, Canada does value its morals, but I also think that there is an argument that they have actually capitulated in some major ways when the US flexes, and that's a problem. And now here's what I would have liked to have seen, right? In a perfect world for me, we would be a strong player in the EU, and being in the EU, we'd have a security blanket, and the EU should be strong enough to stand up to the US. It will be painful, and you'll have a trade war, but there's safety in numbers there. So that's the only way that I think you can more easily stand up and defend those morals. This is why everyone's bootlicking the US at the moment. But the problem is it's not just about the impact on your electorate. It's also about the impact on Ukraine. So if you start having a stand-up argument with Donald Trump about X, Y, and Z, then he's likely to go and screw you and screw Ukraine. So it's all this delicate walking around on bloody eggshells. And that's really, really frustrating, because all of us want our leaders to be really robust, stand up for good morals, and tell the US where to go in certain respects. It's just, there are so many risks involved with that. And if those risks involved a lack of stuff going to Ukraine and a lack of help for Ukraine, then people die as a result of that. So I don't know. I am somewhat torn. Like, I do really genuinely want Keir Starmer to stand up to Trump, but the UK would be on its own. outside of it without a comfort blanket, and we'd be screwed over. And that sucks. It really does suck. But I think the EU's in a stronger position to do that. The problem with the EU is there are many fractious entities in the EU that are causing problem. And you look at AfD, you look at Rassemblement National, you look at a lot of the rise of the populist right in Eastern Europe, but also, you know, you've got that to some degree in Spain with Vox, in Portugal as well. You've got it in Italy with a right-wing coalition of 3 fairly populist parties. It's, yeah, I'd love Europe to be completely united and stand up to US, but I don't know how conceivable that is at the moment. How likely, plausible. So the whole point about meeting Trump here and having this state banquet, as I mentioned, according to Politico as well, a luxurious reception was prepared, especially for Trump in the UK, with a banquet, air parade, and guards of honor. It was planned to be used to influence Trump's position on Ukraine. Now, something else that's happened over the last couple of days is Ukraine has ratified a historic 100-year partnership with the UK. So there's a treaty that's allocating at least £3.6 billion in annual military support for Ukraine per year until the fiscal year 2030 to 2031, and thereafter as needed, Parliament has said. So that's really good. That's, you know, codifying our support for Ukraine from a British point of view. Ukraine's parliament has ratified the 100-year partnership agreement with the UK. Britain will provide $3 billion from frozen Russian assets, 150 artillery systems, new mobile air defense, expanded training, support for long-range weapons production, and become a key partner in energy and critical minerals. So a lot more added there. In fact, that's interesting. I just need to add that to my list. I've got a whole big list. I'm going to be doing a big old military aid video soon. What else? Okay. 3 people have been arrested on a suspicion of spying for Russia in the UK. So a 35-year-old woman, 2 men aged 41 and 46 detained in a counter-terrorist operation, 2 separate addresses in Grays in Essex. So that's something we're going to have to look out for over the coming days. Interesting. What else? Roberta Metsola was in Kiev yesterday. She announced that she's speaking on behalf of the European Parliament. I forget what her position is. Because you get the different elements: the European Council, the European Parliament, European Commission. She's head of one of the elements. So she's announced that a permanent European Parliament representation will open in Kiev. So that's good. That's about, you know, accession and integration. She also said that the EU will soon approve the 19th sanctions package on Russia. That's possibly going to be announced tomorrow. We shall see. And here we have a big piece of news coming from Europe. So Germany has changed its position and now supports the use of frozen Russian assets to finance Ukraine's needs, according to Bloomberg. Germany's position changed in part due to concerns that if the USA completely stops aid to Ukraine, the burden of supporting Kiev would fall disproportionately on Berlin. So this is interesting. So the idea is that there's all these frozen Russian assets, particularly held in Belgium, and it's quite difficult to release them. And there are pros and cons, like I've talked to you about before, and I've actually advocated for them being held for reparations later and just skim off the profits. I actually don't have a problem with that. But Germany's thinking, goodness me, if the US goes south, then it's going to be up to us to bankroll Ukraine, and that will be deeply unpopular with some of our electorate, and it's going to be very costly. So maybe releasing those frozen Russian assets in whole might be in our best interest. So the various options do not include a full seizure of assets. According to Bloomberg sources, the issue of obtaining additional income from the assets is planned to be discussed at a meeting of EU and finance ministers in Copenhagen this week, as well as a summit of EU leaders in October. A final decision is expected to be made during the EU leaders summit on October the 23rd to 4th. Ukraine is currently receiving funds from frozen Russian assets under the G7 mechanism, which provided Ukraine with a $50 billion loan financed by windfall profits from these assets. So there are these different theories about how, I don't know if I got it written somewhere else, no, how these might be used then. Just trying to see if there's any further No, there was somewhere that actually gave one of the options of how they could be used in a different way, and I don't have that. I can't remember where I read that. So as mentioned there, it might not be that the frozen Russian assets. Was it to do with buying European bonds? To do with buying European bonds. I'll try and find that out. But there could be an alternative that would allow maybe more financing to be released from those assets in some way. I don't know. Right, we heard about how there were ideas of Europe not giving out visas to Russians anymore, and then that was poo-pooed by some European nations. It turns out that Greece, Italy, Spain, France, and Hungary refused to restrict the issuance of visas to Russians. It's noted that tightening visa requirements for Russian citizens would harm the tourism industry of these countries. So Spain, as a big old bunch of Russians go on holiday to Spain, and I assume the same is. It's the same for Greece and Italy. Obviously, Hungary, very close relations. France, evidently, they have a viable, have a decent. They've got France has got a very big tourist industry. Right, Paris is one of the most visited cities on earth. So yeah, they don't want to shut down Russian. So that's a case of money versus morality. So we're back to that old chestnut again, like I was discussing with Michelle earlier on. So Michael Vuchar is now listening and driving. I don't know if you caught my discussion. So that we were talking about whether someone was saying that Mark Carney was a good example of standing up for your morals, and I just referred them to you, who keep criticizing Mark Carney for actually sounding strong before the election but capitulating to Russia ever since. Okay, it would be a big mistake not to integrate Ukraine into the EU defense architecture. That's coming from Andrius Kubilius, who is the defense guy in the EU now. So it would be a big mistake not to integrate Ukraine into EU defense architecture. Absolutely. And the same, I would argue, is the case for NATO. So March for Humanity. Did I hear you right? The profits from frozen Russian assets have only been loaned to Ukraine. I thought those illicit profits have been given to the Ukrainian support. No. So the way it works at the moment is that any profits from the investment of these frozen Russian assets that are sitting in, like, Euroclear has them in Belgium, and Japan has some, Britain has some, America has some, the EU has most of them, and certain other nations around. Did I mention Canada? The profits that are generated from those assets are then used to repay loans given to Ukraine. So, for example, the EU has already given over $10 billion or euros of loans from the EU this year. And when those loans are due for repayment, so imagine you're repaying it every month, rather than asking for the money back from Ukraine, Ukraine don't have to pay the loan back. Those loans are paid back by Russian frozen asset profits. So, $10 billion or euros of loans to Ukraine are paid back from skimming the profits off the frozen Russian assets. Now, this, I think, is quite a good sustainable way of continually giving money to Ukraine. Because if you give the entirety of the frozen Russian assets to Ukraine, then that's that money gone, and it can no longer be used to generate money for Ukraine through the profits. And what I think is fairly sensible is if you give Ukraine money from those profits, and then when the war ends, if Russia refuses to pay reparations, then you give the whole lot to Ukraine thereafter for reparations. But some people disagree, and they say, many of you in a live chat will disagree and say, no, it's better if Ukraine gets like $200 billion from Euroclear right now, and then they can really use that to buy loads of stuff. But of course, yeah, that's great. But then where to go thereafter? And then I wonder how liquid those assets are and how easy it is to turn them into cash and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, that's that. Wow. Some of you are, thank you, Levko Koval. A few content creators are as dedicated and consistent as JP. Thank you for the support for Ukraine. Well, thank you for watching. It's a two-way street. Haven't missed a video since 2023. I feel sorry for you. You've heard my voice way too much, my man. And March, says, thanks for clarification. Yeah, hopefully that helps. I do forget because I say things so often, but then I assume that, I automatically assume that everyone watches all of my videos. So therefore, I shouldn't have to repeat myself. Now, people like Levko Koval, they are very rare, right? So a lot of you miss a lot of what I say and you miss explanations. And that's why I often have to repeat myself. Right, we're going to go on to Robert Fico. So just to give you the background, as far as I understand it, I'm no expert, but Robert Fico, when he was elected as the leader in Slovakia, Smer, his party was actually a left-wing populist party, but he went into coalition with the far-right party and another party who I presume are on the right wing, but one is like really far right, like the ultra-nationalists. And so that's kind of weird for a left-wing populist party to go into government with the far-right party and another party. Anyway, that coalition has just veered to the right. So Fico has become essentially a right-wing nationalist, pro-Russian leader, rather like Viktor Orban. And yet his party is nominally a left-wing socialist party, Smer, or a left-wing populist party. Now, that party has still been in the EU coalition. So remember, the EU, when you have a coalition government, I'm saying this to people who don't live in the EU, when you have a coalition government in a country, right, you have like 20 MPs from this party, 20 MPs from that party, 20 MPs from that party, and then you form a government or whatever. But when you are forming coalitions or working in the EU, no one's from the same party unless you're from the same country, because every country has different political parties. So each political party opts into a coalition in the EU. So, Green parties will be in like a green coalition, centre-left people will be, and then you've got a socialist, and then you've got a centrist, and then you've got a far right, and then you've got a liberal right, and then there are all these different coalitions. And the Smer party from Slovakia exists in this EU socialist coalition. So the Party of European Socialists has unanimously voted to expel Slovakia's ruling Smer party, led by Robert Fico. The move to be ratified in Amsterdam on the 16th to 18th follows Fico's meetings with Putin and with Xi and Lukashenko in Beijing in September. So he then went off, didn't he, Robert Fico, to the big military parade in Beijing, and he's hobnobbing it with all the dictators in the world. Meanwhile, his party is clearly not socialist anymore, and he's in bed with the right, and he's doing everything that Putin wants. And the EU Socialist Coalition has said, actually, it's about time you sod it off. So the EU Socialists are to kick out Robert Fico's Smer party. Hopefully that all made sense, and hopefully it was somewhat accurate. Okay. Slovakia and Hungary are to push back against Trump's pressure to cut Russian oil and gas imports, saying they won't move until the EU finds reliable alternatives. It's up to the EU to find it rather than them, which is interesting. It's like, no, we're not going to do that until you come and deliver me everything that I want. That's, I guess, the leverage they have at the moment. So Slovak Economy Minister Denisa Sakova has warned that acting prematurely could seriously damage their industry and economy. Well, prematurely, you've had 3.5 years to freaking do something. I don't think it's premature, you numbnut. But anyway, that's just my uncultured opinion. The Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson has said to Viktor Orban, and I spoke to you the other day at Ulf Kristersson absolutely going to town on Viktor Orban on Twitter, and it was chef's kiss. Anyway, he's now said oil may come from the east, but freedom always comes from the west. What a lovely maxim. I love that. So it's like you stop whinging about oil coming from the east. You want to be importing freedom from the west. In a powerful, although I look at the US at the moment and think, yeah, maybe not. In a powerful message, he reminds Hungary of its past, warns against cozying up to Russia, and urges a return to Western democratic values. So I won't read you what Ulf Kristersson has said, but check it out here. The guy is on a roll. So let's just read the beginning, though. And anyone who's Swedish in the live chat, let me know what you think of Ulf Kristersson. Dear Victor, I understand that there is an election campaign in your country and that this time you're truly being challenged for power. Ooh, ow. But we do not interfere in your election campaign, nor do we want to become part of it. Sweden and the Swedish people have always been friends of Hungary and the Hungarian people, as you know. We were friends of Hungary before your government, during your government, and we will remain so after your government. We remember when Hitler's genocide of Jews struck Hungary and how Sweden in 1944 sent diplomat Raoul Wallenberg on a special mission to Budapest to save as many Hungarian lives as possible. Tens of thousands of Hungarian Jews survived because we provided them with provisional protected passports and citizenship here in Sweden. When the Soviet Union later invaded Hungary, Raoul Wallenberg was forcibly taken to Moscow and disappeared. The Swedish diplomat died, but tens of thousands of Hungarian lives were saved. We would do it again. We also remember when the Soviet Union brutally crushed your Hungarian struggle for democracy and freedom in 1956, and when Prime Minister Imre Nagy was later executed for his efforts to democratize the country. When Russian tanks crushed the Hungarian freedom struggle, the Hungarian people pleaded with the UN and all Western powers to help. Almost no one listened, but one country that showed deep solidarity with you was Sweden. We opened our borders to your freedom fighters and dissidents. We allowed you to build exile opposition against Soviet communism here, despite our non-alignment. It was not without risk for us, but we did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. I am going to read all of this, sounds like. Today, over 40,000 people of Hungarian descent live in Sweden, many of whom are descendants of the Hungarian refugees who came here in connection with the 1956 uprising and are a well-integrated immigrant group in our Swedish society. Democratic states help each other then and now, and they stand up against countries that try to oppress others. That's why, just as in 1945 and 56, we support democratic countries that Russian tanks tried to overrun. Back then, it was about Hungary. Today, it is about Ukraine. And if we do not act, it could be about another country tomorrow. This is also why we often express concern about the developments in Hungary in recent years. Hungary ultimately regained its freedom, but freedom must also be defended. That is why we question when you go to have coffee with the leader of the same country that crushed your compatriots' freedom struggle in 1956 and that today attacks your neighbor, Ukraine. Hungary and the West are not strengthened by closing the door to their European friends or by attacking each other and the very things that distinguish us from barbarism, democracy, the rule of law. Sorry, to distinguish us from barbarism, that being democracy and the rule of law. Let me conclude with some wise words from yourself in 2007. I love it when people are proven wrong by their own words. Quote, and this is Orban in 2007. As a kind of new generation of the West, our message to those younger than we is to stick to a Western type Hungary, not to let Hungary be derailed from its Western path, and to love that Hungary is a Western type country. And to love that Hungary is a Western type country, which means that we believe in the free will of people and in the mutual responsibility towards each other that we take upon us, which are inseparable parts of Western culture. The oil might come from the East, but freedom always comes from the West. So that's actually an Orban quote. Oh, that's even better. Double chef's kiss. That's so good. He's quoted him back to himself as I love it. The oil might come from the East, but freedom always comes from the West. And democracy cannot be directed from above. It can only grow from the hearts of people and in this way create a viable Hungarian life. And then Christensen finishes, finally, I wish to convey Sweden's respect for the Hungarian people and to wish your country a free, peaceful and successful election. Do you know what my first reaction is? Because that is freaking brilliant. That is freaking brilliant. Do you know what my first reaction is? Why can't Trump say something like that? Why can't he write something so brilliantly eloquent and beautifully constructed as that? And even if he doesn't, why can't his speechwriters do that? In fact, I'd love to see that from Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer has said similar things to that, but that was beautifully erudite and on point and so incisive, I think. Just absolutely brilliant. So I hope you don't mind that I read that out to you because I think it was that good. I was reading along and I thought, yes, as Aaron Lee says, bloody powerful. Or as I said, I've got a cousin and we call him Aaron. So Aaron or Aaron, I don't know. Who knows? Full round of applause. Absolutely, Greg Skerritt. Full round of applause for Ulf Kristersson. And hopefully, if there are any Swedes out there that you think that he's done you proud, Anders, who I assume is Norwegian, but maybe Danish, says Høya Sverige, which is definitely how it's pronounced. I checked that out, and it's 100% how you're supposed to pronounce that. I don't even know what it means, but yeah, good stuff. Right, okay, let's move on. Right. We have a Wall Street Journal article, which is, I mean, I've talked to you about this before. This is nothing new, right? It's this idea that Donald Trump has created this scenario whereby it's impossible for the EU or NATO to do what he's demanded, so that he puts sanctions on Russia. So it's like, you have to put 50 to 100% tariffs on China, all of you, all of the EU, all of NATO. And once you've done that, we'll put sanctions on Russia. It's like, that's never going to happen. Yeah, I know it's never going to happen. Oh, well, this gives us an excuse not to put sanctions on Russia, says Trump behind closed doors. Now, the Wall Street Journal have basically written an article that pretty much lays that out. Trump and Europe are at odds over how to sanction Russia. The EU also looks to tap billions of dollars of frozen Russian assets for the first time in conflict. Now, Europe suspects Trump is trying to trick it, Nexter says in interpreting this. European, I presume this is an interpretation of the Wall Street Journal article, and not just Nexter talking, but it could be Nexter, which is a Belarusian kind of, I don't know if it's exiled, I presume it's exiled from Belarus. European diplomats believe Donald Trump deliberately set impossible demands to sabotage new sanctions against Russia. Yeah, the Wall Street Journal reports. Washington is pushing the EU to fully stop buying Russian oil and gas and to impose tariffs on goods from China and India. For Europe, this strikes at a weak spot. Energy dependence remains a major issue, and a break with China, as Trump demands, would hit the EU economy hard. On top of that, all EU decisions require unanimity, and Trump's ally in Budapest has no intention of giving up Russian oil. Hungary and Slovakia have already said they will veto any measures threatening their economies. Brussels also suspects Trump may have commercial motives, namely trying to force Europe to buy more American LNG. An interesting addition to this that I don't think I've got is that during Zapad 2025, these military exercises between Belarus and Russia, Poland has closed the Belarusian border with Poland. And that has actually, so I was wondering why this was a bone of contention with China. So they had a meeting the other day and it wasn't resolved. And China was really angry that Poland hadn't lifted the border closures, because apparently a lot of trade goes from China through Belarus, I presume through Russia to Belarus, and then into Europe. Road and rail transport, cargo, I don't know. But yeah, and they had refused to do that. Now, I don't know if the border closures will continue after Zapad 2025 has finished, which it has now. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Anyway, I'm going to go and talk. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm going to stay here and talk to you about the latest Austrian polls here. And this is what I was talking about earlier about the rise of the far right in Europe and the populist right, which I think is dangerous because it's essentially aligned to and supported by and funded by often, and disinformation is spread to help these guys from Russia, right? So Russia is just very, I think the return on investment that Russia is getting from its bots and trolls is insane. I think, like in 100 years' time, I'm fairly sure Putin will be seen as one of the world's greatest, and I say greatest with a whole load of caveats, one of the world's greatest influencers of the 21st and 20th centuries. But the 21st century is really when it comes down to the internet. I'm fairly sure we'll find out in 50 years quite how incredible influence operations have been from Russia. And like I said to you, I've said this to you many times before, if Russia had taken all the money they spent on this war, the trillions of rubles, literally trillions of rubles they spent on this war, and spent them all on bot farms and troll farms instead, they'd be ruling the world now. They've wasted the money on a kinetic war. They could have absolutely destroyed countries with information wars. Jane Kiev says it's not only Czechia that is now in love with the Russian world. So it's looking bad because Babis from the Czech Republic, who's looking like he's going to win the election in Czechia, has said they're not going to continue the Czech initiative for artillery ammunition that has been so successful in getting artillery ammunition to Ukraine. So the right-wing populists in Czechia are probably going to win the election, and you're going to see a lack of support from Czechia to Ukraine, I think. And we have Austria, which, okay, is not militarily helping Ukraine that much. It's a neutral country, so any help it will be humanitarian. But it sits within Europe and it makes decisions that align with the rest of Europe. The FPO at the moment there is absolutely flying in the polls. A pro-Russian party is polling up 4 points to 36%. They have the problem the FPO has in Austria, as far as I understand it. I'm no expert. Another caveat there is that they need to go, like many European countries, because of proportional representation, they need to go into coalition to rule. And this is what happened previously. No one wanted to rule with them. And in the end, after freaking ages, they couldn't make a government. And so there's now, I think, a tenuous kind of coalition existing of opposition parties. But the problem is the supporters of FPO then get frustrated, and then any issues with the government means that other people go towards the FPO. And this frustration of not being able to rule because people work against you to stop you from ruling sometimes can be counterproductive. You almost need to lance the boil. You almost need like the FPO to rule for a bit so that people realize how shite they are at ruling. This is my theory about Reform UK. And I know some of you might like Reform UK, but they are basically MAGA 2.0. And if they came to rule as a government in the UK, they would be populist and nuts, and they'd burn things down, and you'd lose your welfare state, and it would just be really divisive and not. And also, they're just not very good at ruling. Now, and I'm saying that from some experience because it turns out that they have a load of councils that they've taken control of, and they're screwing up ruling those councils in the UK, like county councils. It's a bit of a nightmare. County Durham, was it a number of other ones, Nottinghamshire, and so on and so forth. And in fact, another council has defected from Reform in Devon because it's a bit of a nightmare. So you almost need some of these parties to rule, like the AfD in Germany, because the AfD are gaining, and they keep getting frustrated because everyone goes into coalition against them, and rightly so. But then they get frustrated from ruling, and then people then start kind of wanting them to rule more because everyone else is against them. The iconoclast in us, we often we like these underdogs because everyone's against them. Everyone's stopping these guys from ruling. Well, we should give them a chance and let them rule and blah, blah, blah. So they end up getting more and more popular. And there is an argument to say, and so be it, they should rule and then show the country how bad they are at ruling. And then you kind of learn from that. You go, oh, yeah, actually, that was a bit of a nightmare. We won't be doing that again until your memories go. And then 50 years later, you end up voting people like that back in. That's what happened with the Second World War. It's like we've kind of forgotten what fascism was like. Like, oh, yeah, something happened in 1939. What was it? Doris, what happened? You were alive in 1939. Doris, what happened? A load of fascism. Oh, yeah, fascism. That was it. I heard about that. Yeah. Was it good? Was fascism good? Sort of. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, maybe we shouldn't do that again. So I just think we're kind of forgetting. Our young people haven't watched all the World War II movies. And, history seems so distant that we're like, yeah, let's try authoritarianism again. Yeah. Democracy sucked, didn't it? It's a bit boring. Yeah. So anyway, really interesting position here. So this is Nick Fuentes. In case you don't know who Nick Fuentes is, he's a white supremacist content creator in the US who is actually becoming more and more acceptable and normalized as the Overton window has kind of expanded. I don't think the Overton window's moved. I think it's just got bigger and bigger now it's acceptable to talk about anything and anyone, and in public platform, anything and anyone. So Nick Fuentes, like 30 years ago, would have been nowhere to be seen, right? You wouldn't have a platform because we didn't have the internet. And it's a bit like the BNP in the UK, the British National Party, which was like, oh, no, skinhead thugs and whatnot. And so, yeah, they exist, but we don't put them on TV and we don't platform them. But now the internet allows platforming of all sorts. That Overton window, the acceptability of platforming and talking and discourse and whatnot is expanded to everything. And now it's kind of normal to allow us to talk about everything, which you can argue is great for freedom of speech. But here's the danger. And this is where, you can start talking about both psychology and philosophy, which is, okay, if we find it completely acceptable to talk all the time about everything, the problem is there's a psychological heuristic or psychological phenomenon called the mere exposure effect. And I talk about this all the time. So that I've written about this. So the mere exposure effect is how advertising works, which is the more you hear something, the more attractive, credible, so on and so forth it becomes. This is how Trump and Farage have gained so much popularity. And this is why there's a big pushback against the BBC in the UK at the moment for platforming reform so much, is because the more you hear about, and this is how Trump, if you control the media, not just the narrative, but actually the news cycles, like if you are the news the whole time, then actually you become more normalized, more acceptable, and actually more attractive, more credible. So the more you hear bonkers conspiracy theories, it's how advertising works. The more I hear Coca-Cola. Oh, what should I have to drink? I'll have a can of Coke. Okay, that's advertising. That's the mere exposure effect. If you are merely exposed to something, it has a positive effect on, you have an improved positive relationship with that thing. So when Nigel Farage gets on TV all the time and says whatever he says, he becomes more acceptable and the things he says become more credible. And that's just fact. It's like, that is, go and look at the research into this, is just how it works. So Trump being on the news cycles, controlling those news cycles, even saying batshit crazy, bonkers things, like crazy bonkers things, you say it enough, it becomes credible and people believe you. And all he does is you say the same things over and over. He lies through his teeth, right? We're going to come on to this in a second. He lies so outrageously, but if you lie just carelessly, almost like punctually or like nonchalantly, you do it the entire time, then people are normalized to it, and then actually they start believing it. It increases the credibility of it. And that's what happened. So, anyway, I just went off on one. I was talking about freaking Nick Fuentes. So he's now kind of the more acceptable face of racism. Nick Fuentes, but this is interesting. So this is what he said. Remember, says Nick Fuentes, first the left celebrated and justified the killing. So this is like Charlie Kirk. Then turned around and said that the Groypers did it. Now these Jackson Hinkle third worldists saying I'm a shill for not automatically blaming Israel for the death of Charlie Kirk. So you've got so much going on here. So Jackson Hinkle is a pro-Russian American nut job shill for the Kremlin, right? Having a go at Nick Fuentes. So Nick Fuentes is pushing back, saying, now that I think of it, what Max Blumenthal, Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and Jackson Hinkle all have in common? Question mark. And then the answer, the Russian flag. So you've got Nick Fuentes, who exists on this far right, kind of white supremacist anti-Semite, starting to have a go at all these other people on quite far to the right that are all mentioned there, calling them out for being Russian shills. And my head's like, oh my goodness, what do I do with this? Like, this is someone that I politically find disgusting, but he's right on this, but you get this. It's like it's such an amorphous mass over here, as it is kind of on the left as well, like the far left. As soon as you go to radical ends of the spectrum, you start getting more wingnut ideas about things, conspiracy theories and this and that. And actually, you would just then get a lot of disagreement because some people are like, yeah, I'm kind of with you on all this area, but that's just crazy. And then it's like herding cats, arguably. Anyway, that's just my tuppence. Right. South Korean intelligence believe that Putin has given North Korea a nuclear reactor and is, quote, working to verify the information. Wow. The equipment would be for use in a nuclear submarine. Wow. So there you go. That's what happens when you allow Russia and North Korea to become a bit friendly with each other. This is true, King Raccoon. I am going to nominate Doris for Queen. I think, poor woman, she's experienced a lot, that's for sure. She's experienced suffering and she could help people out in the world. Okay. So there's so much still to go through. Right. Very quickly. We're going to talk just a little bit about, we're going to move on to other things, talk about America. We'll cycle back and talk about lots of things. Trump, again, like I said earlier, he just lies and lies, and he lies so frequently that it normalizes. So the stuff he says about reducing prescription drugs by 1,400%, we all know that you can only reduce it by 100% because then it's free. Anything above 100%, you're paying people to take the drugs. And yet he said it 20 times now in public, and no one's corrected him. And either he knows it's absolute bollocks, or he doesn't know it's bollocks, and he's just completely mathematically inept. But either way, he's being allowed to continue to say those lies, and then it just becomes normalized. Here, he keeps saying this sort of stuff. The amount of money that the US is receiving in inward investments from these nations that he has amazingly got to just give their money to you, just throw their money. It's like every other nation's like this. Yeah, Trump, take it all, take it all. So here Trump says the EU is paying our country 950 billion. Think of that. We're talking about a year. 950 billion. Japan is paying $650 billion. China is paying us a tremendous tariff. And it's like, no, I mean, this has been community corrected. Tariffs are actually paid by importers. China doesn't pay a tariff. Like the fact he A, doesn't understand how tariffs work still and is lying about that, and B, is lying about all of these numbers. Like these are either not agreed at all or they're referring to something quite different. So like there was no agreement written, as far as I know, between either Japan and the US or the EU and the US that actually stipulates those numbers. Then he said here with Keir Starmer today that although Nexter reports that he was talking about Britain, no, 17 trillion is from everything added up. So the US president claimed that this year other nations will invest more than $17 trillion in the US. He is living in a freaking fantasy land. That's more than half the entire US GDP. And he just thinks that the countries are bending over themselves to invest in the US. When, of course, as we know, if we look at what happened the last time a country really tried to invest in the US, let's go to this. So Chris Owicki says South Korea's government. So to those of you who haven't been paying attention to this, the Hyundai plant in the US, I think in Georgia, was reported by someone who was running for Georgian, I think, Democratic GOP representative there, and she reported ICE. She reported the Hyundai plant to ICE because there were lots of South Koreans there. So ICE then went in, arrested over 300 South Koreans that were all on these kind of particular visas, but the visas hadn't been extended or something because of bureaucracy and the US not doing what was needed to be done in order for this plant to be built. So South Korea had said, we're going to invest, Hyundai said, we're going to invest all this money in building this battery plant in Georgia, let's say. Yeah, it is Georgia. We're going to invest all this money in building this plant in Georgia. And then the Americans said, that's brilliant. Well, we'll help you. What do you need? And they said, we need all these workers to build all these particularly skilled workers to do all this stuff to build this battery plant. And then America went, well, we don't have those people. And then South Korea said, well, in that case, we're going to have to bring those people from South Korea to the US to build this thing so that we can employ lots of Americans. And that then took place. And then they got reported to ICE. This is how I understand it anyway. They got reported to ICE. ICE went in and arrested 300 people. And now Hyundai is saying, well, that plant's now not going to be operational till sometime in 2026. And by the way, we're not going to invest in this other plant over there and this other plant over there and this other plant over there type thing. And then South Korea is now investigating this. So and then Donald Trump realized that this was an absolute own goal because ICE had damaged his economic prospects of inward investment that he keeps saying is to the tune of 17 trillion. And here's an example of South Korea supposedly investing in the US, and he's arrested all the South Koreans. And it's just like, what are you doing? So Chris Owicki says South Korea's government has announced that it's launching an investigation into human rights abuses said to have been carried out by the US ICE agency against South Korean workers deported from Georgia, following further damaging testimony from the deportees. The government said today that it plans to immediately begin a joint investigation involving the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Justice, the company, regarding the human rights violations against our citizens detained in the US state of Georgia. To this end, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is currently consulting with the company representatives. An official says it will need to discuss specific investigation methods with the company representatives. We expect to begin soon as soon as preparations are complete. The Ministry of Justice will also participate in the investigation once it has consulted on who will be invited to contribute. It's likely that the authorities will seek to interview the detained workers individually or obtain their accounts, as it did not previously have the opportunity for individual discussions during consular visits to the detainees, etc., etc., etc. Blah, blah, blah. Point is that, because this is quite a long one, although Hyundai says it wants to continue with building out its planned Georgia plant, the newspaper Junang says that it will be difficult to persuade the deported workers, many of whom are elite specialists, to risk another trip to the US. And this is being denounced by South Koreans and whatnot. The paper reports that the ICE raid occurred during the equipment installation and commissioning preparation stages of the factory construction. Typically, Korean engineers operate the equipment, make fine adjustments, and train local engineers before withdrawing. However, this time the raid stopped work at the commissioning stage. Some of the equipment uses special construction methods that require only the most elite team members from partner companies to set up, making finding replacement personnel virtually impossible. So this desire to just arrest as many brown-skinned people as possible has led to a complete economic faux pas here. The US has shot themselves in the foot. Another lie, sorry, going on the lie front here. So this is, and obviously I don't have the sound for this for you, but basically Donald Trump stands up at the state dinner in front of King Charles and basically and says it is a privilege to be the first American president welcomed here. And like, hang on. So US presidents who have visited Windsor Castle: Woodrow Wilson, Dwight Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton twice, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump in 2018, and Joe Biden in 2021. It's like, what are you talking about? It's just lies the whole time. To the point that Channel 4, and I've already told you this today, but if you've got a VPN, there's a 142-minute program. This, so it's 2 hours 22 minutes, right, of them going through every lie that they've come across for that Trump has said in the last however many months, right, and they go through it. They say number 1, number 2, number 3, and they present a lie, when it took place, and then they present the evidence that debunks the lie, and then he sources the evidence that debunks the lie. It's just a really simple program, but it just goes through each of these incidences, and it is just brutal. It's brutal because it's just factual. And weirdly, I haven't watched it all because I had to stop after a while. I'm going to finish watching it though. But 100% of lies I had reported previously. I'm like, and I was explaining to my partner and to one of my sons, I was like, oh, this is what happened there. And I gave the extra meat on the bone to that. Anyway, Channel 4, I mean, brilliant. They had a 3-hour session where they just went to town on Trump and his lies. They first of all with a 3-part documentary. It's part 2 last night, and then 2 hours 20 minutes of that. And you're like, they're not pulling the punches. Channel 4. Channel 4's a major TV channel in the UK. It's a terrestrial TV channel, and they're like, screw you, Trump, screw you right off. And they did this. It's brilliant. There are 4 separate tweets here from Channel 4 that are taking the mickey out of Trump's tweeting and basically doing the Gavin Newsom, and they're so delightful. I'm going to read them. Some backwater Brit, and they're self-deprecating, which is also what I love. I love that humour. Channel 4 saying some backwater British TV channel called Channel 4 is showing over 100 untruths told by your favourite president, Donald J. Trump, tonight at 10 p.m. I have no idea what time zone that is, but I do know it will be full of fake news because I always speak the truth. Do not watch Channel 4. So bad it couldn't be named Channel 1. It's just, that's my favourite. Channel 4, so bad it couldn't be named Channel 1, are showing over 100 untruths that they say falsely have been told by your favourite president, Nobel Peace Prize deserving Donald J. Trump at 10 p.m. tonight. Will they show 100 times Donald J. Trump was handsome and right? No. And then finally, thoughts on the failing Channel 4. brackets even worse than ITV. They are showing more than 100 untruths told by your favorite president, Donald J. Trump. This is fake news by the MSM and an attack on your favorite president, Donald J. Trump. Do not watch at 10 p.m. I just think that's brilliant. I love it. I love it. I love it. So if you have a VPN, please watch that, or see if they've uploaded it to YouTube or whatever. It gives you an idea of the scale of the disinformation that comes out that man's mouth. And I know loads of you think I've got TDS, but my goodness, like, it's hard not to be obsessed with the craziness in the US when you understand how much this guy says. I just want to show you. Now, I know you might think I'm a bit harsh on Reform, and at least, Reform aren't the Tories or Labour, and they aren't this and they aren't that. I'm going to vote Reform as a kind of reaction. I just think that's dangerous, and I've explained why many times. This is GB News, which is basically the platform for Reform. In fact, Nigel Farage has a program on GB News and was wearing a GB News lapel pin when he was at the House Judiciary Committee hearing in the US, because he was starting another GB News program in the US. This is the GB News reporter reporting on the motorcade with the US president. This is how obsequious he is. It's sickening. I mean, you can't hear it, but just you get the idea. This is like a national news channel, and he's saluting all of these cars as they go by, as if he's some kind of, yeah, I love you, Trump. I love America. I love, and it's just saying how wonderful the motorcade is. And then the other guy speaking next to him says, it's almost as impressive. He said, the other guy said it was almost as impressive as the parade that we put on for the Americans. Like, the carriages and the gold lame fittings and the bearskins and all our troops. It's like, this is more impressive, the other guy seriously said. And it's so obsequious. It's just like, oh my God, they really are MAGA 2.0. Like, GB News is trying to be Fox News. Now, I know there's some of you out there that probably watch GB News. Just be warned. I mean, it is overt propaganda. Okay, so talking about Trump a little bit here, it's just worth understanding that the latest batch of Trump approval ratings polls are out, that 9 months in, he's the most unpopular president in modern American history. And the second most unpopular president was Donald Trump 1.0. So he's actually gone now more unpopular than 1.0 by quite a wee margin there. And it's kind of unsurprising, in my opinion, the sort of things he's doing. It's now his approval is at 39%. And of course, disapproval is bigger, which gives him a -17. He's now settling into a very low range for support for him. His hard floor of 40% is rarely broken. This is important as we start talking about midterms. Why? Leading up to the 2018 midterm elections, Donald Trump's approval rating was consistently in the low to mid 40s. Polls from late October and early November 2018, just before the elections, showed his approval rating hovering around 40 to 41%. 2018 was the year of the big blue wave. And in other words, in the midterm elections that happened between presidential elections, remember, every 2 years, every representative in the House of Representatives is up for election. That's like 438 of them, or however many it is. And then a third of the senators, so usually something like 30, 35 senators are up for election. And that's the midterms. And the last midterms under Trump, so it would have been 2018, there was a blue wave. Like, people reacted massively against Trump, and they lost the House of Representatives by a huge margin. And this was disastrous for the Trump term. And he's got lower ratings now than he had in 2018's. So his approval rating in various polls was in the high 30s to low 40s, with his disapproval rating consistently higher. For example, a Gallup poll conducted in late October 2018 showed a 40% approval and 54% disapproval. Trump's current disapproval is 56%. One more consideration: in 2018, the economy was strong. Today, consumer confidence is hovering at a 50-year low, or near a 50-year low. So the economy is not in a good way. People are feeling it. His polling is the worst it's ever been, and it's the worst of any modern US president. He is deeply afraid of the midterm elections, which is precisely why he's trying to control the narrative so that the elections are rigged, or you've got soft rigging of controlling the press and the TV channels. This is what's going on, right? Be aware that he knows the midterms, the Republicans are going to get spanked, which is why even people like Jeff Duncan. So Jeff Duncan was a Republican that came out against Trump in the last election. And he was the former lieutenant governor of, was it Georgia at the time? He's running, no. Anyway, Justin, former GOP lieutenant governor Jeff Duncan, a fierce Trump critic who supported Kamala Harris, is running for Georgia governor as a Democrat. Now, okay, these people are like Adam Kinzinger, Liz Cheney. These people have been kicked out of the GOP, the Republican Party now. I wonder whether you'll get any Republican that looks at the polling and lives in a swing district, represents a swing district, whether you start getting people crossing the floor. You're seeing this in the UK. You've had a major defection from the Conservative Party to Reform recently, and that is pretty serious. So the Conservatives are in trouble. You might end up seeing that with Labour if Labour get into a spot of bother. Which they are in. But here he says, I'm running for governor to make Georgia the front line of democracy and a backstop against extremism. Now, he will then attract moderate Republicans as well as all the Democrats, right? Pretty much. So that's a very sensible thing. And I wonder if you'll see a few former Republicans do similarly to that. By the way, I agree with you, John Hare. Oh, no, that's not John Hare. Channel 4 News is the best in the UK. I really like Channel 4 News. I think it is actually the best news channel we have. Yeah. Nah, ATP is best. No, don't. So, right, we're going to go on to talk a little bit about freedom of speech because it is freaking depressing. Because I don't have sound, I'm going to read this. So the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh calls for the firing of AG Pam Bondi today. Now, what you are seeing from some corners, and we had this with Tucker Carlson with his, and I did this in my last video on Jimmy Kimmel getting effectively cancelled by Brendan Carr, really, functionally. Who is in charge of the FCC, who's a government employee. So the government really cancelled Jimmy Kimmel. But you do have a fracturing in some of the right-wing information spaces. So Tucker Carlson, not to Jimmy Kimmel, but to Pam Bondi, came out and said, you start having hate crime legislation, you start losing the ability to have thoughts, and you have the government controlling your thoughts. He came out massively against Pam Bondi, right? Because she has stated that this is 24 seconds. Shall I? Well, she basically said we're going to start having hate crime legislation. Hate speech legislation, and the old school Republicans who weren't so easily swayed and are now like jumping on to cancel culture and telling comedians they can't crack jokes and want to shut up people from free speech even though that they don't like what they're saying. You do have some old school conservatives who are like, no, they should be able to say horrible things. That's the nature of freedom of speech. And the Daily Wire, which is a right-wing media outlet, the Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire has called for the firing of AG Pam Bondi today after she announced the DOJ may prosecute Office Depot for refusing to print posters for a Charlie Kirk vigil in Michigan. So what happened is Office Depot, some kind of office stationery company, didn't allow one of their employees, it might have even been a former employee, I don't know, to print off Charlie Kirk commemoration posters. Like, I want to print these off at work. And they're like, no, you can't do that. And then this then became a freedom of speech issue. It's like, I'm not allowed to print these off at work. It's like, yeah, no, of course you're not. You're not allowed to print your birthday cards at work. You're not allowed, you can't come into work. And I know we've all done that a bit, haven't we? Like, I've got a couple of pens from work or something like this, or I don't know, people have taken this. I'm not saying I've done this because actually I don't do stuff like this. I'm generally pretty good. But, people might take a stapler home or use work office facilities for, I don't know, something or other. But here's a guy like expecting this, right? And expecting the company to say, to print all stuff out for him so he can print all his commemoration posters for Charlie Kirk. And they said, no, you can't do that. And then Pam Bondi's got involved as the Attorney General, because that's what you do, and said that, well, we're going to prosecute them for not agreeing to print someone's private stuff. So, the DOJ may prosecute Office Depot for refusing to print posters for a Charlie Kirk vigil in Michigan. Walsh wrote on Twitter, so this is the Daily Wire guy, saying, get rid of her today. This is insane. Conservatives have fought for decades for the right to refuse service to anyone. We won that fight. Now Pam Bondi wants to roll it all back for no reason. So you can talk about cakes and gay people and refusing to make cakes for gay couples, and that whole argument that's already been litigated in a number of different countries, probably with different outcomes. But, we've had this argument before and we were on the other side. Right. And now she's demanding that they do that a private entity has to do what someone demands of them. That ain't happening. So he's absolutely right here. We won that fight. Now Pam Bondi wants to roll it back for no reason. The employee who didn't print the flyer was already fired by his employer. Yeah, so it's a former employee. He's already fired by his employer. This stuff is being handled successfully through free speech and free markets. This is totally gratuitous and pointless. We need the AG focused on bringing down the left-wing terror cells, not prosecuting Office Depot, for God's sake. Matt is, of course, correct, and he's not the only Conservative calling for her resignation today. So there's a really fascinating fracture that is happening there. Now, as I've told you already, the Australian ABC reporter was barred from Trump's UK press conference after asking the president questions about his business activity. So we have this attack on freedom of speech that's taking place in many different quarters. This is more to do with economics, but this is about disinforming or trying to cover up issues. So I was talking to you just now about the economy is not in a good way in the US compared to what it should be and what it was before he took over. So Trump said, and this might kind of pass you by and you might think it's not important, but it is. Suspect to SEC approval, companies and corporations should no longer be forced to report on a quarterly basis. Quarterly reporting, ! But rather to report on a 6 month basis. This will save money and allow managers to focus on properly running their companies. Did you ever hear the statement that China has a 50 to 100-year view on management of a company, whereas we run our companies on a quarterly basis? Not good. Now, that might sound reasonable to you, but what he's trying to do is get companies not having to show whether they're making profits or not, or show their figures, and do it far less frequently, so there is no accountability for how badly the economy is going. So it happens only every 6 months rather than every 3 months. This is just another way of disguising the truth. And again, it's about the manipulation of the truth. And I just think that's a slightly different example, but I think it's still as insidious. Another one, just a bit of grifting news here. So this is a New York Times bombshell. Steve Witkoff is at the center of a shady crypto deal enriching the Trump family. In May, Mr. Witkoff's son, Zach, announced the first of the deals at a conference in Dubai. One of Sheikh Tahnoon's investment firms would deposit $2 billion into World Liberty Financial. Remember, that is run by Steve Witkoff's son and Donald Trump's son. They both run this crypto entity called World Liberty Financial, which is absolutely grifted off the government. So a cryptocurrency startup founded by the Witkoffs and the Trumps. 2 weeks later, the White House agreed to allow the UAE access to hundreds of thousands of the world's most advanced and scarce computer chips, a crucial tool in the high-stakes race to dominate artificial intelligence. Many of the chips would go to G42, a sprawling technology firm controlled by Sheikh Tahnoon, despite national security concerns that the chips would be shared with China. Okay, so to be clear, Trump gave UAE access to chips despite national security concerns China would get them and to dominate AI to put billions in his own and Witkoff's pockets, selling out our country. Why don't Republicans care? Where are all the hunter hunters, people that are after Hunter Biden? Well, this is happening under their noses and no one seems to give a damn. Here's a quote from another news article on this. In May, no, that's the same quote. Sorry, this is absolutely insane. This administration is corrupt on a scale unheard of in American history. And that comes from New York Times. You can go and look at the whole article. Anatomy of two giant deals. The UAE got chips. The Trump team got crypto riches. So again, it's just complete grifting of the Trump family. And who loses out? The American nation in national security, as UAE gets vital chips that they're undoubtedly going to share with China. And then we hear, just go sideways a little bit here. This is on Jeffrey Epstein. So the Republicans have blocked a motion to subpoena the CEOs of 4 banks that moved Epstein's money and later reported $1.5 billion in suspicious transactions. So we know, and actually banks have already had Deutsche Bank was done and JP Morgan were done over Epstein. So the Congress wanted to subpoena 4 CEOs of banks who are responsible for moving Jeffrey Epstein's money around, reporting $1.5 billion in suspicious transactions. And every Republican, apart from Thomas Massie, voted not to subpoena the CEOs. It is no, it's not unfathomable because I can fathom exactly what's going on here, but it is insane the amount of cover-up. And again, I'm going to sound super pro-Democrat and anti-Republican, but it's kind of easy to be that at the moment because only the Republicans are covering up pedophiles. Only the Republicans are covering up pedophiles in Congress at the moment. So you can accuse me of whatever bias you like, but if you do that, you need to justify why you would want to protect pedophiles. Only Thomas Massie, who I massively disagree with on every other political topic apart from his really strong support for getting the Epstein files out there. But it seems that even the other 3 that support the discharge petition, Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and Nancy Mace are, I don't know, they seem to be absent. I don't know if they didn't vote or whether they voted against this. Why would you want to hide subpoenaing 4 CEOs of banks? What would be wrong with subpoenaing them unless you're trying to hide what those people can tell you and what that will show? Shady money is like, it's just, I don't get it, but I do get it. But it's just, what blows my mind is this happening in front of people's faces. It's like, you know, if you were asking, just any other example of somebody so obviously defending the worst people, you'd be pulling your hair out and going nuts. Like it's obvious that they are covering up for pedophiles and pedophile facilitators, and yet they're doing that and they're getting away with it. I'm not going to vote for this. I'm not going to vote for this. We're not going to subpoena them. Just incredible. Some good news. The Scottish government is considering quitting Twitter following owner Elon Musk's use of platform to spread disinformation, sow discord and incite violence on British streets. Interesting. And talking about disinformation, here are a few of the people that you've probably been speaking to over the last few months or years. This is, just in case you don't know what a bot farm looks like. So these are bots. These are all individual profiles on every single one of those phones. So in order to have profiles, you need a phone to kind of have those accounts on. So they are all then connected to central computers, and they can, probably using AI, get them to like and comment using, again, AI on people's feeds that are usually, well, these look like Chinese or Asian. I don't know what their agenda would be, but whatever your agenda is, you can promote and amplify voices, and those sorts of bot farms exist. They're 10 a penny around the world these days. Pretty incredible stuff there. The last thing, I don't. This is a bit weird and out of place, but I want to look into this. I haven't read the article yet, but I definitely am going to read it. So in the UK, famously, Margaret Thatcher came along. She's a free marketeer, and she privatised all our national industries, like our water industry. And so you've got all these different water companies, and then they're not doing a very good job at the moment. They're very controversial water companies at the moment because they've not been investing enough, and there are all these leaks going on, and it's really not very good service. And you could argue the same to a degree in certain other areas. British Steel was nationalised. Was privatised, and now we're looking at nationalising it again because it's in trouble. And then we've got the railways, and we've had to nationalise certain railways again because some of the privatised franchises have been so poor recently. So there's this tension between those who are free marketeers who be like, well, you get X inefficiency, you get like managerial inefficiency with monopolies, so you need to privatize these. And then people who are like, yeah, but then they're just interested in profits and not interested in service, and actually then prices go up as big corporations make huge profits and then plow that back into shareholders rather than back into the system or back into the stakeholders who are the taxpayers, right? So there's been this report. UK Public has paid £200 billion to shareholders of key industries since privatisation. So analysis reveals that there's been a privatisation premium. In other words, a premium meaning that we've paid more than we would have done had they not been privatised. So we as taxpayers and users, £250 per household per year is paid to owners of water, rail, bus, energy and mail services just since 2010. So in 15 years, every household in Britain is paying £250 more for the benefit of our core services being privatised. Now, I don't want to sound like some union drum beating socialist here, but I do believe in a mixed economy where some of our core services, I think, should remain in the public sector. What annoys me is, so we privatise our energy industry, and do you know who one of the biggest energy companies in the UK is at the moment? It's a company called EDF. Do you know what EDF stands for? Should we have a look at that? EDF. Who owns one of the biggest companies in EDF? Is a British integrated company wholly owned by French state-owned EDF. Oh, look at that. Électricité de France. Oh, so it turns out that we have privatized our freaking energy industry to the French state. They can come along, win tenders in the UK, and we go, well, the free market, isn't it? Meanwhile, we're paying profits to the French state. Why aren't we paying profits to our state? So then that just honestly, it blows my mind. And you can sit on the economic right and say, oh yeah, privatization is better for X, Y, and Z. But if it's costing £250 per house every year for the last 15 years for the benefit of sending that money to France and other companies. British Gas was owned by Centrica, which for a time was a German company. I don't know if it is now. You're like, we're sending that to Germany, we're sending that to France. Like, all of that money should be piled back into the services and back into the coffers of our government so that we can have a better welfare state. Anyway, that's today's rant. You can see it just got me there. Like, hats off to EDF, hats off to the French state. Do you know what we should do? We should start up a big energy company, a state-owned public sector energy company, and then we're going to go and win loads of tenders in these countries that insist on free market enterprise. I think the Japanese have done this as well, haven't they, with trains and whatnot. And anyway, it's just, yeah, it does my nutting. That's my tuppence there. Now, I have a whole other section that I was going to do on extra Jimmy Kimmel stuff that I've gleaned from today, but I'll leave that for tomorrow. Let's just have a look at some of your comments, some of your very kind contributions. So Niels Clement or Clement, I don't know. Thank you very much for your gifts of ATP Geopolitics memberships. Super, super generous. Thank you. My missus is just phoning me. I think she's picking up my boy live. Any probs? You can see this is how we don't talk face to face in our house anymore. We just use WhatsApp. We don't even live in the house. She's like driving around, parenting my children or our children, and that's how we do it. I'm live. I can't speak now, so I better finish this and find out what's going on. Right, March for Humanity. So sorry, the false president of the USA is in your country mucking things up. Great job by the folk who put the great images up on the castle tower. Unfortunately, I think they got taken down before he got there though, and they got arrested for security issues, which I think sucks big time. I'm going to try and work out how this plays out. I was kind of defending Keir Starmer earlier. However, I am really, really worried if we have given away tech data power to people like Palantir and whoever else. I don't know if Palantir are involved, but certainly a bunch of other big tech companies, all the way over to like BlackRock. Like if we have prostituted ourselves to the American tech industry, so that we might be getting quite a lot of investment in here, which is desperately needed. But that's what I'm most worried about. I am genuinely worried about that. And if that happens, I will be super critical of Starmer. But then I'll be thinking, well, like if he had stood up to that, then what would have happened? Otherwise, what was the alternative? Not getting $150 billion pounds worth of investment into the UK at a time when he's getting absolutely raked over the coals for lack of economic growth. So, I understand why he wouldn't stand up to that. But going back to what Michel said, I really think it's important to stand up for that. But then I also understand, and this is why sometimes I don't commit fully to some evaluations, because I understand the dilemma in that must be going on, and it's kind of the least worst outcome, and that's sometimes difficult to work out. Anyway, thank you, by the way, March. AJ Simo, legend in his own underwear, gifted 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. Thanks, mate. Really appreciate that. Julian Rossiter, back in town. I just read that some of King Harold Godwinson's 1066, King Harold, the guy that didn't, but it's on the Bayeux Tapestry, he got an arrow in his eye, but he didn't. I read that some of King Harold's kids moved to Eastern Europe, and his daughter Githa married a prince of Kiev. Does that make the UK and Ukraine long lost cousins? Now there's a rabbit hole I need to go and look down. There's a warren I need to get my face into. That sounds weird. Sorry, Warren. Julian, thank you for that. I'm going to look into that. Thank you very much for your support. Really appreciate it. Wee bit furry. I think Starmer government is the same position as ABC News. Party is doing what can be done, not what it wants to. This is my point. I forget the phrase surrender in advance. Yeah. This is it. That's basically, like, I have my strong moral convictions, but I understand why people have to sometimes bootlick, even though I hate the fact that I have to bootlick. But this is, this is like there's a bully in the playground. I think you should stand up to the bully, but then you get a broken jaw and you're in hospital for 2 weeks. So I understand why you don't stand up to him, because actually you don't want your jaw broken. But actually you should stand up to him, because if no one stands up to him, then he just gets away with everything. And there's your dilemma. It's like, well, yeah, do you want to offer your jaw to get broken? I don't know. I'd like to say I would fight valiantly, get my jaw broken. But when you're talking about, like I said, when you're talking about a country, it's not just your own. Like I can make that stand and have my jaw broken. What I don't want to do is make that stand and have 70 million people's jaws broken on my behalf from my decision. That's where it gets slightly different. The analogy breaks down. Anyway, yeah, Zeb, thank you very much, Zeb. You have been really generous of late, so I really appreciate that. Thank you. And finally, Paul Gilbert, thanks for the live JP rant on my friend. Oh no, thanks for the live JP rant on my friend. It's the importance of punctuation, Paul, but I noticed there's a capital there that you must have full stopped that. Anyway, thank you. Is what I meant to say, rather than criticise you for lack of full stops. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your contributions. So this is kind of what I was talking about, though. So I'll leave you on a couple of comments. Levko Koval says, I'm personally a bit disappointed by Carney. He may be keeping the economy afloat, but the strong stance against the US never manifested itself. This is what I'm led to believe, but I haven't kept. I've taken Michael Vujar's word for it, because I haven't had time to check it myself. But Michael he was otherwise like supportive of Carney, but has then says that he's kind of acquiesced at every turn, and he's just trying to play it safe. That Keir-Starmer approach there, and it's difficult. So I do get that. Yeah. So people have been talking about that. I think tech is going to be a big issue going forward. I think tech and AI. There's going to be a lot going on about that. Industrial revolution, the workers destroy factory machines, data centers, tech may become big targets of wealth inequality gets too bad. So here's an interesting idea. So back when we used to, well, we do get lots of dystopian films, don't we? There are lots. I was going to say back in the 90s, there were loads of dystopian films and blah, 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 and they'll be reacting against certain things. Actually, there are loads of dystopian films looking at different areas, but I wonder whether there will be a kind of Luddite approach, and we can imagine a dystopian future where tech is so prevalent that actually, rather than smashing up the harvesters, the combine harvesters or whatever, the plows, we're going to smash up data centers, and that will be the new area for political discontent, or not even political, like it goes beyond politics. It's like, it is political social discontent, because is this going to be not Malthusian? No, more again going to the Luddites, where tech is going to take our jobs. So you are going to find, and I keep saying this, I keep having these conversations with people down a pub, and my missus, not that she cares anymore, she's heard it enough, but where I say, look, you are going to start seeing 4-day working weeks. New Zealand's been trialing these out, and the idea is you need people to keep their incomes. So you need to generate a way of having 4-day working weeks where people's productivity is still broadly the same, so that you pay them the same. You don't want 4-day working weeks where you're paying them less, because that then becomes just contracting the economy. So but there's not going to be the demand for people to the degree there has previously been. Now, in the UK, the Green Party brought out a white paper about 5 years ago about going down to 4-day working week, and some people dismissed it. And I, at the time, was like, this needs to be seriously discussed, by the way. And the Green Party are ahead of the game. It's interesting. Green Party have gone really left-wing populist now under Zach Polansky in the UK. They were getting quite mainstream up in the last election, and they're embracing NATO, and they're a bit like the German Green Party. And I was like, yeah, the Green Party is in a good place. I like that. And then they just had this leadership campaign, Zach Polansky against these two co-leaders that were running. And the two co-leaders were opting for a more sensible kind of Green Party, mature Green Party. And Zach Polansky went for left-wing populist. And I understand why he did that. He absolutely smashed these other two, by the way. So he won massively, overwhelmingly. And I understand why he did that, because he's reacting against Nigel Farage, and he's building up a narrative that is anti-reform, and he's pitting the Green Party against reform to try and take away the left-wing voters from Labour, rather than see the Green Party kind of merge with the centrist Labour Lib Dems, where everyone's kind of indistinguishable, because actually Labour and Lib Dems broadly have decent environmental objectives, or at least in principle they do. so to differentiate the Green Party from the other parties, Zach Polanski's gone full on no to war, no to the, immigration is good. I'm going to give you a positive sense of what immigration is, where Reform are like anti-immigration. So that and I understand why he's doing that. So there is a rationale there that is sensible, but it's not the sort of Green Party that I would see my self-voting for, because I know the importance of NATO now, for example, in doing what I've done. Now, I've voted previously for the Green Party and for Lib Dems and for Labour. So my vote, I've told you before, I can't even remember who I voted for in the last election, because I just look at who's most likely to win in my constituency against the Conservatives, knowing that none of them will ever win against the Conservatives. So there's no point in me voting. So every election, I just turn up to the polls with a kind of like my tail between my legs, saying I'm one of the most politically active people I know. And yet I don't have any impetus to vote, because on first past the post voting system in the UK, my vote is meaningless. So anyway, that's by the by. We need electoral reform in the UK. But anyway, so the Green Party has taken this interesting turn recently, and I just thought I'd let you know. I am now just waffling, so I will stop and say goodbye. Thank you very much for your support. I really appreciate it. Yeah, lots of you having a great conversation. Thank you so much for your really lively chat. Thanks to the mods. And please remember, Car for Ukraine, go to atpgeo.com/donate, and you will see the Car for Ukraine landing page. Please help donate to get some vehicles to the Ukrainians. I hope this stream is okay. It's chaotic as it always is. I hope I made sense, and sorry if I didn't. Take care, everybody, and I'll speak to you soon. Toodle pips. Toodle. This is something I say, toodle pips, and I get it spelled back to me in so many weird and wonderful ways. Toodle, toodle pips, Pips. So just to let you know, toodle pips. Random.